can get started. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's good once again to be back here at UBC. And unfortunately, I didn't make enough copies of the notes today. I ran out of time. So what we have done is some of you have some copies of the notes. And if you don't, you can follow us up on the screen. The topic for our discussion today is existentialism. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what is existentialism and perhaps why is it that we've chosen to speak about this topic, because it is an important topic. Now obviously existentialism is formulated from the two words, existence and ism, all right? But if you ask for what is the definition of existentialism, most philosophers will find it very difficult to give you one definition for what is this philosophy called existentialism. We will see today that actually it would run against the grains of this philosophy to give you one definition and to say this is the philosophy that is called existentialism. In fact, in this philosophy, it encourages people to find their own philosophy, right? It encourages people to think about what their own purpose for life is, and also it encourages them to develop their own morals or their own code for living. And therefore, it would be very difficult to give one particular definition for it. Sometimes you find that philosophers will choose to define it by what it is, rather what it is not, rather than what it actually is. Now, going into the history of existentialism, some of the most famous existentialist thinkers, and some of them even denied that they were existentialist thinkers, some of the most famous ones are Søren Kierkegaard, is actually known as the founder of this particular school of thought, and he was actually a theist and a Christian. And we'll look at it today that existentialism actually started off as a movement within Christianity itself, and was a theistic and a very Christian movement. But later on there was another path of existentialism called atheistic existentialism as well. Another one was Friedrich Nietzsche, and Nietzsche was an atheist. He's famously known to have said God is dead. Good. Then there is, the Russian author Dostoevsky, then the most famous one who actually popularized the term existentialism. And today when you talk about it, you cannot avoid but to talk about him. Especially in post-war France after the Second World War, Jean-Paul Sartre, and then one of his students, Martin Heidegger and Albert Camus, who some of you might have read a book or two written by him. As I said, some of these scholars flatly denied that they were existentialists. And the first question that comes to your mind is, why is this discussion important and why have I chosen to speak about it? I've chosen to speak about it because people have come up and asked me, what is the Islamic perspective of existentialism? Or can existentialism as a philosophy have space within Islam? Another reason why it is important is because sometimes I hear these days that speakers will often refer to existentialist philosophy, or they will be preaching existentialist philosophy within their religious preachings as well. Third reason why it's important, one of the most important questions in this day and age, especially within the modern world, is the question on why do we exist? What is the purpose of life? And is there meaning to life? At no point in time has this question become as important to the individual as it has become today. Today in the modern world, the individual is no longer willing to accept tradition, in the sense that my tradition tells me that this is supposed to be my purpose for life, and therefore I accept it submittingly to that purpose of life. Everyone is looking for what is their own purpose in life. Well, existentialism exactly deals with that. It deals with the human condition. And one of the most important questions within the human condition is, what is the meaning to life? So this philosophy will be important for us to look at. Existentialism, amongst many things, also posits that every human being must find his own philosophy in life. And he must determine it for himself, and it must be authentic. Authentic in the sense it must be unique, it must be original, it must be his own. Whereas traditionally religion has taught us that there is one philosophy, there is one deen, and there is one sharia. And everybody must accord with that deen, and they must accord with that sharia. In fact, it will be interesting for you to know that the terminology used in the Quran for sharia is mizan. It is the scale. right? It is the balance by which you measure, it is the standard by which you measure your own actions and determine them to be right or to be wrong. Well, existentialism says such a thing is not possible. Then it becomes an important discussion for us. An extension to this, of course, is since everything becomes subjective, extension to the argument above, existentialism as a school believes that the human experience of reality is subjective. And it is that subjective reality, as I will talk about it today, that is more valuable than the objective reality. Well, once you believe in that, this makes religious philosophy a subjective manner and paves the way for a more pluralistic view of the world. And this opens up the whole discussion on religious pluralism. Existentialism also has other implications as well. It has implications on our ethics and what is the basis for our ethics. It has implications on how we raise our children and how we raise our classes and how we raise the students in our classes and many other implications as well. Now, as always, and as I've always done in this class, I've stressed the importance for us to first understand what is the subject matter that we're dealing with. It really makes no sense for us to predicate an Islamic opinion of a subject that we don't really understand. And you find this happens when it comes to the theory of evolution. Even though many will not understand the theory of evolution, they will predicate an Islamic view of it, which is very surprising. Similarly, this also happens with existentialism. We may or may not understand what it is, but sometimes we will predicate a view of it, or predicate a view of a very simple and very superficial understanding of what is existentialism. So let's try to avoid that, not only in this class, but let's try to avoid that in everything that we come across in life. Secondly, the question that's often asked is a very basic question. It's often asked, what is the Islamic view on it? As in, is it Islamically halal or is it Islamically haram? Right? And I don't think that's the right approach to take. Any ideology that you come across has many facets to it. It has many premises to it. Some of those premises are right, and that's why it has been accepted by the people. There is an aspect or a dimension of rightness to it, and that's why it has been accepted. And there are aspects to it which we may disagree with, and those are the ones we consider to be wrong. Therefore, it will make more sense for us to ask today, what aspects of existentialism do we consider to be okay and correct, according to the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, and what aspects of existentialism do we not consider to be correct? It's like when somebody comes and says, feminism, is it Islamically correct or is it not correct? Well, feminism is not one preposition. It's a number of prepositions, a number of ideas. Some of it we may find acceptable, some of it we may not find acceptable. Just giving a blatant statement or a very blank statement and saying that feminism is right or wrong is really not helpful for us. I'll say the same thing for existentialism as well. All right, any questions so far? Okay, so let us continue. Now, I'm going to begin by explaining existentialism by a term that was coined by Jean-Paul Sartre in, I believe it was 45. It's a very famous term. Existence precedes essence. And existence in Arabic is wujud. Essence in Arabic is, we did this in the last session. Wujud and mahiyat. Right? Sometimes it's translated in English as quiddity, all right? Or the whatness of thing. It is the answer that you give to the question, what is it, when it is asked of a thing. I'm going to go through some examples of it today, all right? But Sartre famously said, existence precedes essence. Now sometimes it is also said that Mullah Sadra was also of the same opinion. Amongst Muslim philosophers, for a long time, there was this debate. And some of the philosophers were conscious about this debate, and some of the philosophers were not conscious about this debate, but they gave certain views about it. The Muslim philosophers always knew that whenever you look at a thing, it has two things to it. There are two things that you can understand about it immediately. The first is that it exists, and the second is that, well, it has a particular form, right? It has a whatness to it. That's its essence, all right? Now, the question they asked was, what is principial? What is asl? What is primary? Is the existence primary and the essence is something that we conjure? Or is the essence primary and the existence is what we conjure in our mind? What is real and what is arbitrary? What is real and what is i'tibari? The traditional position until Mullah Sadra was that that which is real is the essence of the thing, that which is put on it is the existence of the thing. Now, I don't expect you to completely understand the implications of this, but just bear it in mind. Okay? Mullah Sadr came along and said quite the opposite. He said something similar to, well, existence precedes essence. Existence is primary, the essence is what comes on it. That's a very simple explanation of Mullah Sadra's view. However, the reason I'm raising this is to point out that Mullah Sadra's opinion was presented in a different context altogether. Jean-Paul Sartre's opinion and expression is in a different context altogether. Sometimes, unfortunately, some of the writers online or some of the thinkers will mix up the two. I don't want you to do that. One of the things that should be clear to you is when Sartre talks about existence, he's primarily referring to the human existence, the human condition, the human life, the human experience, and not existence as a whole. But when Mullah Sadra talks about existence, he's talking about that thing which is common in everything, that thing that I and you share with a tree and a mountain and a stone. That is our existence. Of course, he has a very profound understanding of what is existence, but I want you to separate those two and not to mix those two up. Okay? Now, he says that existence precedes essence. To understand this, I think we first have to understand the view that Aristotle had. Once you understand what Aristotle was trying to teach, you'll understand that Sartre was teaching quite the opposite. All right? What was Aristotle teaching? Aristotle was saying that anything, before it comes into existence, it has a predefined blueprint. It has an essence. And everything, when it comes into existence, is trying to fulfill its potential. It's trying to fulfill its essence. For example, let's start with a very simple example. You first come and make a blueprint. Then you lay down the foundations for the blueprint. Once the foundations have been laid down, those foundations can only and only become the blueprint. That's the essence of the foundation. That's the potential of the foundations. Once you've laid down the foundation for the house, you cannot turn it into, let's say, a shopping center. The foundations have been laid for a house. Let's use a better example. An acorn or a seed, all right? It has a particular essence, and it has a particular potential. Its potential is only and only to become an acorn tree. That seed does not have the potential of becoming an apple tree, and that seed does not have the potential of becoming an animal either, right? Its essence has been written into it, and that is the potential that it has. That is the reason for why it was created. The seed was created to fulfill its potential of becoming an apple tree or an acorn tree. Nothing more than that. The human being, Aristotle said, is also the same. Now, Aristotle had a teleological view of the world, right? Muslim scholars also had a teleological view of the world. They said a human being, well, a certain potential has already been put within the human being. And he is in the process of materializing that potential. What is the potential of a human being? It is what makes him human. What is a human being according to Aristotle? A human being is an
animal can speak.
A rational animal. All right? So when they say natif, it doesn't mean he can speak, it means that he can intellect. Okay? He can rationalize. A rational animal. So a human being can choose to become a rational animal. That's the essence of a human being, and that's the potential that it has. But look at the assumptions over here. The assumption is that there is a wise creator. He has thought up of a blueprint or a potential or an essence for a human being. So the essence comes first. Then he created the human being, gave him existence, and now the human being is working towards fulfilling his potential. That was predefined for him. Remember that word. That was predefined for him. Well, Sartre said, well, according to Aristotle, essence precedes existence. Good. Well, Sartre said, no, quite the opposite. It is existence that precedes essence. All right? Now, what does that mean? 3 premises, but just follow me through these 3 premises. Just going to bring it up. So, 1, 2, 3. 3 premises, all right? Premise number 1, God does not exist. Right? Sartre's premises begins with that. This is the atheistic form of existentialism. They are theistic arguments for it, but it begins by saying that God does not exist. And this sort of idea is famously known in his work as forlornness. They might be wondering, what is forlornness? Let me give you an example. Let's say as a teacher I come into class and I tell you that I want you to hand in an assignment that is worth 70% of your grade and I expect it in tomorrow. Then you come and ask me, well, what are the details of the assignment? How do you want me to write the assignment? And what exactly do you want me to write about it? And I come and tell you, I'm not answering those questions. You go, do your thing, come back tomorrow, hand it in, whatever it is. How would you feel? You would feel unguided, undirected, you would feel forlorn. All right? Sartre said, well, we expect guidance from God. But just imagine that guidance did not come. And we were cast into this world, and we were told, do your thing. Right? How would you feel? Forlorn. Or in the case of Sartre, he said, well, there is no teacher. There is no guide. There is no God. A human being first has to realize that he is forlorn. What does that mean? That means, number two, is that there is no objective or predefined purpose to human existence. If there is no sentient creator to make a blueprint for you, then there is no blueprint. That means there is no purpose to your life. There is no purpose to your existence. There is no meaning to life. That has been predefined. Very important. That has been predefined for you. All right? Now, when he says that, I just remember a hadith from our first Imam, Imam Ali alayhi salam. In this hadith, which is a very short hadith, but it's a very beautiful hadith, he says the person who does not know where he comes from cannot know where he is going, or cannot know where he is supposed to go. The idea of knowing where we come from is intertwined to the idea of knowing where we are going. And if a person believes that he doesn't come from anything sentient, obviously he would also believe that there is no meaningful purpose for him, or at least one that has been predefined for him. To this extent, the nihilists and the existentialists are in common. You've heard of nihilism, yes? The idea that there is no purpose to life. There is no objective purpose to life. If you were to come to a nihilist today and ask him what is the purpose to life, he would say there is no purpose to life. You'd ask him, well, can I have a purpose to life? As in, can I create for myself a purpose to life? And what would a nihilist say? No, you can't. Your life can have no purpose. Existentialists are different though. If you were to ask them, is there a predefined purpose to life? They would say, obviously there isn't, because there is no sentient creator. All right? The next question though, can you define a purpose for your life, even though there isn't one? What would an existentialist say? He would say, yes, you can, right? And that's what Sartre is trying to say. Well, saying humans can create a meaningful purpose for their existence. Hence, a human first exists, Sartre will say, within a particular context in his society, and then he determines a purpose for his existence, or in other words, he determines his own essence, right? In this case, existence precedes essence. Contrary to what Aristotle used to say, essence precedes existence, all right? Now that is Sartre's existentialism. Does anybody have a second page that I can steal? All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Now, if I go on and talk about whether this is acceptable to us or not, I think many of you will find that this is not acceptable to us. I do want to talk about some of the features of Sartre's existentialism. Anytime an idea finds acceptance in the minds of people, and it has found acceptance in the minds of many people, in arts, in politics, in many other fields as well, you should know that there's an aspect of it that touches human nature. There's an aspect of it that people find is rational and relevant to them. Relevance is very important. Anytime you speak to someone, speak about that which is relevant to them, and they will listen to you. Why is it relevant? Well, some of the features of Sartre's existentialism, and I've put up 4 over there, and these 4 terms are very important in his existentialism. These terms appear over and over and over again. The first is human condition. Existentialists begin by talking about the human condition. What is the human condition? The human condition is what makes us human. What makes us human? First, self-awareness. We are aware of our own existence. Other animals may not be aware of their own existence. Second, freedom and responsibility. We are free to choose. And Sartre will go over and over, and most existentialists will take it as axiomatic. There is no doubt about it, that we are free to choose. Of course, you will say, even the Quran says we are free to choose. There's a difference between their freedom and the freedom of the Quran, and I'll explain it to you. We are free to choose. But human will is part of the human condition. I've also put up over there that striving for identity, searching for meaning, anxiety, and fear of death, these are all part of the human condition. And what existentialists will say is, see, religion, when it comes to you and starts talking to you about, starts by talking about God, and then talks to you about life after death, and then talks to you about what you are supposed to do in this world. And they would say that this is a divine perspective of the human condition, and it doesn't address some of the most important issues within the human condition. Our search for meaning, our anxieties, our fears, our sense of responsibility, our freedom, so on and so forth. They would say that existentialism requires that you first start talking about those things which are obvious to me, which I can experience for myself. Things such as what? Such as my anxieties, my fears, my anguish, my pain, my search for meaning, my freedom, my feeling of freedom, and my self-awareness as well. The human condition is very important to existentialism. Secondly, authentic. Every human being ought to develop an authentic purpose to life. Copying a purpose, taking it from someone else, taking it from a book, taking it from a sage, is not acceptable within the existentialist school. All right? Everybody has to develop their own authentic religion, per se, and their own authentic moral by which they want to live life. Thirdly, independence and liberation. All right? Free will is axiomatic in existentialism. There is no fatalism. There is no predestination. You are not condemned to do anything. Right? You choose to do it, and therefore you take the responsibility for doing it as well. All right? Now, you will say that, well, even the Quran talks about free will and liberation. The Prophet came to liberate, right? He removed the shackles that were holding people down. Even the Quran says you have free will, right? The Quran says that you have independence. Can you give me an example of a verse where the Quran says you are free to choose? Yes, sister.
There's no force in religion.
لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. There is no compulsion in religion after truth has been made clear from deviation or falsehood. There's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars on this one, whether this is a legislative verse or whether this is an ontological, I don't want to use the word existential, but ontological verse. Is it saying that you cannot force another human being? Or is it saying that this is what the human condition is? He cannot be forced, right? You can force him to do something, you can force him to say something, but you cannot force a human being to believe in something. That's the reality of things, regardless of what you do. There's a difference of opinion, but clearly it shows that there is freedom of choice. Any other verse? There's one verse that I want to share with you. إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ. We have guided him the path. We have shown him the right path. إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. Now he chooses either to be grateful or he chooses to be ungrateful. So you will say that, look, even the Quran preaches independence and free will and liberation. And the existentialists will say, no, I believe in complete free will, in complete liberation. Not only should I be free to choose the path, but I should also be free to choose what is right and what is wrong. I be the one that defines right, and I be the one that defines wrong. This is ultimate freedom. The moment you tell me that there is an objective or a third definition of what is right and wrong, now you're limiting my freedom, and I don't accept that.
There is no absolute right or wrong.
There is no absolute right or wrong, exactly. Whether it is in reality or morality, there is no such thing. Now, of course, it depends what type of existentialist thinker you're talking to. When we're talking about the atheistic ones, then this is where it leads you to. But if you're talking about the theistic one, there still might be room in there for some sort of objective right and wrong. And the last one that's very important as well is responsibility. All right? Human beings, Sartre said, fear to take on responsibility. They fear responsibility. They don't want responsibility. Anytime they have to take on responsibility, they will try to move away from it. Now, you will say, well, we look at most religions also preach the importance of taking on responsibility. You are responsible for your own actions. Doesn't the Quran say that? لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. No soul shall bear the burden of another soul, right? Or the Quran says, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى. You do an iota of good, you will see it, and you will be responsible for it. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. You do an iota of evil, but you're responsible for it. Take responsibility for your actions. And the existentialist would say, no, the responsibility that I am talking about is different from the one that you're talking about. Most people gravitate towards religion, they would say, because they don't want to take on responsibility. The responsibility of understanding reality for themselves. They want somebody else to tell them what is reality. Most people take on religion because they don't want the responsibility of having to determine for themselves what is right and what is wrong. They want somebody else to tell them what is right and what is wrong. An existentialist thinker would say, you need to take on responsibility for what is right and what is wrong, and then the responsibility for acting upon it. Just accepting it from a third source is feigning responsibility. All right? Is that clear?
Is this only for ideology, like choosing ideologies, or
No, both ideology and morality.
because we do it like for everything else, like for studying,
Yes?
we ask if like a third person to teach us.
Yes.
For like, I don't know, when we get sick, we go to the third person who's a doctor to give us. Do they say that for the other purposes, or is it's only just for?
I don't think existentialist thinkers would have a problem. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. I don't think they have a problem with you going to somebody else and learning, or going to somebody else for guidance. They would have a problem with you saying that I'm doing this not because I have understood it to be correct. I am doing this because I'm just going to accept his authority. Accepting another person's philosophical, religious, theological authority, that is what is problematic for them. Okay? All right. Now, obviously many of the principles of the atheistic existentialism would obviously contradict with Islamic theology. Right? I mean, the moment you talk about atheism, it contradicts with Tawheed, which is theism. Also, the fact that there is no objective or purpose to life, what does it contradict with? Qiyamah, right? See, Qiyamah is very important. Ma'ad is very important. Ma'ad does not just symbolize life after death. Ma'ad in Islamic theology symbolizes purpose for life. So many times in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا. Do you think we have created you in vain, that you have no purpose in life? Why? وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ. That you're not going to return back to us. So the return back to God is intertwined and intermingled with a purposeful life. Ma'ad represents a purposeful life. That there is an objective and there is a blueprint out there for you to follow. Well, this type of existentialist thinking clearly contradicts that. And then the whole idea that prophets of God come to explain the Quran, they come to explain the deen and the sharia to us, and the fact that there is one deen and one sharia for all of humanity, that all human beings can follow and acquire salvation, well, clearly existentialism would in no way accept that. Both theistic and atheistic existentialism. So there is no doubt that this form of existentialism would contradict the most basic principles of Islam. But then, you've got theistic existentialism. And theistic existentialism, as I mentioned to you earlier, this whole existentialism was actually a Christian and a theistic movement. And it started with Kierkegaard. And let me give you the background to why it started. See, whenever you come across an ideology, ask yourself, what was the political and social context of the time that gave rise to this ideology? Often we don't understand that. And we take an ideology, and sometimes we try to import or export ideologies into areas where they don't have the same social context, and they don't have the same political context either. Right? For example, feminism, we'll take a Western feminism and try to export it to the East. Well, it doesn't work over there. I'm not saying that the East does not need its feminism of its own. It certainly does. I'm not saying that there are no problems over there. There are certainly problems over there that need to be dealt with. But exporting one form of it into another area, which is not the right context for it, well, that doesn't make sense. What's important is that we understand all ideologies, where they come from. Even Sartre's existentialism, it was born after the Second World War. And you have to understand the relationship between the Second World War and Sartre's existentialism. After the Second World War, people in France and in Europe had seen a lot of horror. They had seen people dying, they'd seen people being killed, they'd seen people being, people being oppressed and tyrannized, right? And in all of that they asked, where is God? And they lost faith in God. When they lost faith in God, they become disoriented. Why? Because if you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you're supposed to be going. So then they started to ask themselves, what is the purpose to life? And that's why Sartre comes in. And that's why Sartre, in that period of time, is so influential and so effective. Well, Kierkegaard, when he came up with existentialism, what was the religious context for it? See, it's the 19th century. And for 2 centuries, the Enlightenment, and before that the Renaissance, has been hitting hard at religion. And the Enlightenment, what does it represent in human society? It represents our movement away from, superstition, our movement away from pseudoscience, to our movement, the movement of humanity, into accepting science and accepting rationalism as the criteria and the standard for accepting anything and everything. Religion also now has to conform to science and has to conform to rationalism as well. And suddenly you find that some of the leaders of the church at that time were developing a form of the religion which was rational, logical, philosophical, plain and simple, and scientific as well. No longer room for miracles in the Bible or the church. God is now being viewed from a very philosophical, very rational perspective. He is this cold and detached God, not the God that cares, not the God that's passionate, right? When or not a passionate, relationship with God anymore, right? When Kierkegaard sees such a form of Christianity developing, well, he reacts to it. And he reacts to it by formulating existentialism, all right? Now, what is Kierkegaard's existentialism? I'm going to talk about it because he shares some of the principles with atheistic existentialism as well. And I've outlined it as 4 particular principles, and I just want to go over them with you. The first one, he says that the reality or truth, whether it's reality with a capital R or reality with a small r, you'll say, what's the difference between the two? Reality with the capital R is the objective reality, if you accept that there is an objective reality. Reality with a small r is a subjective reality, relative reality, all right? And the truth with the capital T, al-haq, we would say God. Truth with a small t is whatever the truth that makes sense to you, your subjective truth, right? So, reality or the truth cannot be understood with rationalism alone. It has to be experienced by all the human faculties, by your emotions, and by your passion, and by your imagination as well. This brings up a philosophy that Kierkegaard used to preach, and it's called absurdism. What is absurdism? It means that if something makes absolutely no logical sense, in fact, logic tells you this thing is wrong, and it makes absolutely no scientific sense, right? Because science tells you this is wrong, and that thing is absurd, that is exactly the reason why you need to have faith in it, right? It is absurd, and therefore requires your faith in it.
So we cannot
right?
prove it logically.
Yeah, so God, he would say, cannot be proven logically. Science says there is no God. And that's exactly why you need to believe in God, because it is absurd. It requires you to have a leap of faith and not just a rational understanding of it. Okay, 1. Number 2, rational discussions are not sufficient for experiencing reality. We can talk about philosophy. We can talk about existentialism all day long, 7 days a week, 365 days in a year. You're not going to understand anything about reality. So how do you understand it? By living it. By living your philosophy. Whatever your philosophy is, your subjective philosophy, you live it through actions. And therefore Sartre, over and over again, emphasized the need for action over thought. That if you want to experience reality, you need to act, live that philosophy. Thirdly, the subjective perspective of each individual is more valuable to him than the objective reality. Whether you accept there is an objective reality or not, that which is important to you is your subjective reality. That which makes a difference to you, that which formulates your reality, is your subjective reality. And this is the important part. A person's subjective understanding should be able to have an influence upon his philosophy or his outlook at life and upon his moral code as well. So no longer this idea of having an objective reality and objective moral code. Your subjective understanding should also allow you to create that reality and to create that moral code as well. And then finally, humans have the freedom to develop their own reality and their own standards, and they must take responsibility for this. So in traditional religion, you have God through the agency of the prophet or through the prophets explaining to you what your responsibilities are. Not in existentialism. You determine your own responsibility and then you take responsibility for it and you act according to it. Now I've spoken quite a bit. So before I go into the last 3 points that I have, maybe I don't want you to see them too well. What are your thoughts on these 4 features? Are they acceptable to you? Do you find them problematic? If you find them problematic, don't just tell me yes or no. Tell me why you find them problematic. Do you think that an Islamic approach can be had towards this form of existentialism? Do you think such existentialism can be molded into Islam, or Islam does have such features?
Rational discussions are not sufficient. I guess that's not acceptable by Islam. Because if we look at the verses in Quran, they invite people to think more.
What's the word used in Arabic for it?
It's like لَعَلَّكُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ.
يتفكرون. تعقلون. Yes.
Yeah.
The only difference is that usually we translate aql as rationality or reason. This is what they call aql juz'i, the particular aql. There's an aql which is an aql kulli. Alright? So there seems that the rational mind is not sufficient to understand reality.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say things. You are free to challenge if you want.
On the same topic, I guess, at least for ordinary people,
Yes.
we never go through rigorous, rational, axionic
Yes.
principles to believe in
Correct.
religion and God.
Correct.
Especially like people who convert to Islam, if you listen to their stories, they're always talking about their feelings and their objective sort of experiences that they had, their subjective
Even
experiences.
subjective experiences that they had.
And so I guess rational discussions are not sufficient for ordinary people. I mean, you have to go through a lot of...
No, but you're telling me that ordinary people don't even usually sometimes go through rational discussions. Many of the people who would, let's say, revert to the faith, it's usually because they've been touched by something or someone in the faith.
Yeah.
So it's more the emotional side, though there's some rationality involved. But let's not talk about reverts. Let's talk about people who are born in the faith. How many of them actually rationally think about the faith? They don't think about the faith. Then my question to you would be, isn't that dangerous? Because if you remove rationality from the discussion, now you could actually believe in anything because you don't have to naturally or rationally prove it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
There is a point to this absurdism that you say, in the sense that when the way I was taught
Yes.
is that the reason we have religions is that there are some things that we are unable to get knowledge about because
Okay.
we are part of the whole thing,
Correct.
and the small part cannot get an idea of the whole
Mhm.
thing, no matter how many tries.
Correct.
So, yeah, there is some
Yes.
correctness or Islamicness
Right.
to
To absurdism. So we're finite and reality is infinite. The reality with the capital R, God, is infinite. There's no way that the finite can comprehend the infinite. And therefore, in most cases, then it just has to take a leap of faith. Okay. So I would accept that, let's say if there are some things which the mind says, I cannot understand it. All right? But it says it is possible. The mind doesn't say that this is impossible. It says it's possible, but I don't understand it. Okay? There definitely I would say that religion has come to explain some of those things to us. The best examples I can give you is about the hereafter itself. There are so many descriptions about what is going to happen in the hereafter. The mind tells you, I can't prove this for myself, But at the same time, the human mind tells you that it's not impossible. It is possible. I accept that. No, what Kierkegaard is saying is that when the mind knows something is illogical, that is exactly why you need to have faith in it. If we allow that to happen, then I mean, anything and everything is good to go. Any other thoughts about subjectivity?
Well, one thing is, if truth is relative,
Yes.
then we will have like lots of problems.
So be it.
Because we could say like, okay, my truth is to, like my truth forced me to kill people, for example.
Right.
Then this would cause lots of problems in society, right?
Right, and then that gets us into a very big discussion on the basis of ethics. You know, where do ethics come from? Are they cultural? Are they subjective? Are they rational? Are they, based on a social contract, like Hobbes said? Or is it utilitarian? Is it through the ontology, as Kant said? There's a whole big discussion over there.
But still, it's problematic. I know we have like lots of discussions.
Yes.
But the truth, like what we believe in, it actually affects our actions.
So what you're telling me is something cannot be right because if I accept it, it is problematic. Like, it is inconvenient.
I say if the truth is relative, so everyone
Okay.
has its own way of, for example,
Okay.
if it's subjective, like
Yes.
what they say is correct,
Okay.
then what's the case when two people have like problems? What were the actions? Like we're in a society, right?
Yes.
So the actions can affect other people.
Yes.
So then how do we want to?
Okay, no, I definitely agree that there are some practical, I guess, conflicts involved,
Yeah.
practical implications for it which don't work out. I'm just trying to discuss it at a very theoretical level. And if this is what reality is, then this is what reality is. We have to come to terms with it, Yeah. All right, I just want to share 3 thoughts with you to end the session for today. All right, we're coming towards the end of the session. So we're going to say that, look, rationalism is required in understanding reality, but it is not sufficient by itself for grasping reality. Okay? Rationalism is important. Now, obviously, when we talk about rationalism, we use the word aql for it. I've explained to you that aql is not just reason and rationalism. There's a higher intellect, the ability to understand and the ability to see things. But it definitely is necessary for us to understand reality. And there is Quranic emphasis on that. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not intellect? Or the hadith of the 6th Imam, very famous hadith and very powerful hadith. Al-aqlu ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman wa iktusiba bihi al-jinan, right? The aql is that faculty within you through which you worship God, through which you understand God, through which you understand reality, and through which you acquire your salvation. You determine what your purpose and goal in life is. So definitely that is true. But it is not sufficient for grasping reality by itself. You cannot understand reality just by thinking about it. You cannot understand reality simply by reading about it or listening to it. All right? You have to experience it. And this is why in Islam, both in Sunni and Shia thought, we have mysticism. Right? In the Ahl Sunnah it's known as Sufism. In the Shia it's known as Irfan. What is Irfan supposed to do? Irfan is supposed to help you to take your concepts of reality and to convert them into your experiences of reality. If somebody ever asked you, what is Irfan? This is the most simplest and the best definition of it. We all have concepts of God in our mind. That is not enough to create faith. Iman is not concepts. Iman is what? Is an experience. It is an experience of God, not just a conceptualization of God. The Sharia has been brought, Irfan has been, developed to allow us to take these concepts that we have and to turn them into our experiences. So when Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about the fact that, I don't worship anything unless I see it, right? And I see God in front of me and behind me and to my right and to my left, what he means that I experience God in my life, in every aspect of my life, right? So yes, reason and rationality is important. It has to be there. It has its place over there. The aql is a gift of God given to humanity. They must use this gift, but at the same time we're going to say it is not enough for grasping reality. You have to have iman, and you have to actually actualize that. Number two, faith, iman, and good deeds are required for understanding reality. So when Sartre says action, live your philosophy, that's what the Quran is telling you as well, right? الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. There's so much emphasis in the Quran, عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. What does عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ symbolize? It symbolizes living your philosophy. You know, the very beautiful hadith, it says that iman has a status over Islam. What is Islam? Islam is your simple understanding of the faith. What is iman? Iman is when you start believing in the faith. When that faith goes from your mind and now starts entering your heart. Okay? And entering the heart is not enough. It says after that, you have to have taqwa. Because taqwa is of a higher status than iman. What is taqwa? Taqwa is living your philosophy. Right? Performing good deeds. Staying away from what is wrong. This is called living your philosophy, right? And then after taqwa comes, Sister Kristen, after taqwa comes Islam, iman, yaqeen. I shouldn't say that. Comes yaqeen, right? Certainty. What is certainty? That's your experience of reality. You know, in fact, they talk about reality or yaqeen, and they say there are 3 levels of yaqeen, right? There is ilmul yaqeen, and there is aynul yaqeen, and there is haqqul yaqeen, right? What's ilmul yaqeen? Ilmul yaqeen is when you're standing behind the wall and you can see smoke above the wall. What does that tell you? That there's a fire. And then you go over the wall and you can see the fire for yourself. And then you go close to the fire and you put your hand in it, and now you can experience it for yourself, right? That experience is what we want to have of reality, and that experience is what we want to have of God, and that can only come with iman and amal salih. So living out your philosophy. We agree with that as well. There's no problem over there. Third one, though, we will say religion, ethics, and reality is objective, and it is not open to subjectivism. All right? There is a reality out there. So religion is more, you know, like mathematics and science, and not like art. In what sense, though? In the sense that when it comes to art, you know, when a person looks at a piece of art, one person can say, hey, this is beautiful, and another person says that, no, it's not beautiful. And there's no right or wrong in it, correct? And both can be right about it, because that's their subjective perception of it. When it comes to, though, physics and chemistry and biology, you know, you can't have this sort of conflict in there. One is right, one is wrong, simple. Religion, when it talks about ethics, it talks about doctrines. Well, the Quran clearly states there is haqq and there is batil, meaning that there is a standard out there, and if your beliefs match up to that standard, this is haqq. If your beliefs don't match up to the standard, this is batil, right? So the religion is objective and not subjective. I have a caveat up there. The caveat is very important. It says, however, one's subjective understanding may be valuable in salvation, but not in formulation of realities or ethics. That's important as well. Right? So, regardless of what you believed in your salvation, your own subjective understanding may help you. For example, there may be a person who's not a Muslim, but for whatever reason, this was the highest level of truth that they could acquire given their circumstances. That is valuable to God. If they tried to learn the truth, and this was the most that they could learn, right? And they had no recourse to anything else, their subjective understanding is valuable to God. Even though it wasn't right, it is valuable to God. The Prophet of Allah passes by a lady who is working on her sewing machine. The Prophet of Allah asks her at that time that, how do you know God exists? And that lady says to him, see, when I stop moving the sewing machine, well, it stops stitching, right? So, when I see the universe that is moving around me, then there must be someone who is moving the universe as well. Now, that was her understanding. Today a philosopher would come and he would say, I can tear this understanding apart. Okay, fine, you can tear that apart, that's okay. But the Prophet of Allah said, look at the understanding that she had. All of you should have this type of understanding. Understanding that is at your level. But her understanding, even though in some senses was not the perfect understanding, it was a valuable understanding for her salvation. Alright? Similarly, you find that sometimes the Prophet or the Imams had two companions, and to one of them they would say one thing, and to other they would say something higher, right? This person had a particular level of Iman and a particular understanding. This other person had a higher level of Iman and a higher understanding. The Imam did not condemn this person and say that, you know what, you are not going to be saved because you don't have this higher level of understanding. He said, your understanding is also valuable for your salvation, even though it may not be the perfect understanding. All right? So we say that the aql plays the role of kashifiyat. What does that mean? It means it's like a torch. It discovers reality for you. It doesn't create reality for you. The intellect discovers reality for you. It doesn't create reality for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Open floor now for any questions. Yes.
So, from an epistemological point of view, existentialism is a modern sort of thing, whereas
It is.
Islam is usually conceptualized as a traditional school of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we look at the biggest issue in all these discussions
Yes.
about the existence of God,
Yes.
the only credible argument that we see in Islamic teaching
Yes.
comes from Greek philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't come from like Quran or Hadith or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to basically conceptualize Islam and look at Quran and Hadith
Mm-hmm.
from an existentialism point of view with a modern kind of thinking that we can't prove it for you, it's just like what this guy Søren Kierkegaard says.
Right.
He says that there's absolutely no argument for the existence of God. You can't
Right.
prove it.
Right.
If I bring you any argument, you can,
Right.
bring me another argument and cancel what I was just saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first issue that you brought up by the fact that the arguments for the existence of God, these are not Quranic arguments or Hadithi arguments, but most of these arguments have been formulated by the Greek scholars. They can't be Quranic arguments and they can't be Hadithi arguments, because the arguments for the existence of God must precede our acceptance of Scripture, correct? I mean, they must come before we accept Scripture. So these arguments have to be rational arguments. These arguments have to be intellectual arguments. So they have to proceed even before we come and accept Scripture. Otherwise, a person would say that, well, how do I accept this Scripture? And you would say, because God says so. And you say, well, how do I know God exists? You say, because, well, the Scripture says, God exists, and so on and so forth. We'd get into a vicious cycle. So this whole discussion on the existence of God has to precede Scripture, one. This takes us to the next step, where we say that philosophical discussions and epistemological discussions will always precede Scripture, right? Your basis for understanding reality will then formulate how you come and you approach Scripture. You approach the Quran, you approach the Hadith. It is based on a particular basis of reality, right? So for example, even today when you have tafsir of the Quran, you have different genres of tafsir, right? You have kalami tafsir, you've got aqli tafsir, you've got irfani tafsir, you've got ilmi tafsir, you've got hadithi tafsir, right? That is basically on the basis, or your hermeneutics, you would say, for approaching the scripture itself. But however, once you prove the authenticity of the Quran, there is to some extent that you can, let us say the Quran is being symbolic in this area or being metaphorical in this area. Once you push it too much, once you take it out completely of its context, right? Once you say a word can mean anything, For example, the Quran is talking about haq and batil. And over again, it's talking about haq and batil, right? So haq and batil means that there is an objective truth, and then your understanding either matches up to it, which is haq, or it doesn't match up to it, which is batil, right? Now, this is the obvious understanding that you get from the Quran. But if you want to take an existential view, and then you want to force it onto the Quran to say that, haq and batil is not that which matches up with the objective reality, but that which matches up with what is genuine within you, right? That which you understood to be genuine, And are you living it or are you not living it? Because sometimes somebody understands something to be true within himself, but they're not willing to accept it. So what they understand to be true becomes their standard of the truth, and haqq is if they're willing to accept what they have understood, and batil is if they're not willing to accept what they have understood, right? You could symbolically and metaphorically reinterpret the Quran in this way. But there are two problems with that. The first problem with it is that now you are stretching the expressions of the Arabic language and stretching the words of the Arabic language to go beyond what anybody has imagined them to be, right? And now the Quran can mean anything and everything, right? And the second thing also is, the problem with that is that you are imposing a particular view upon the Quran. And this is known as tafsir bil-ra'i, right? You take a particular view and you come to the Quran and you say, well, we need to impose this view upon the Quran, which is frowned upon as well. I think we have to stop over here. Yes, sure.
I didn't understand the answer that you answered for Moin's question. As you know, in the Surah Mu'minun,
Yes.
have an ayah.
Yes.
وإن هذه أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاتقون فتقطعوا أمرهم بينهم زبرا كل حزب بما لديهم فرحون. How can you define with subjective understanding as you mentioned in your lecture? Because it said كل حزب بما لديهم فرحون.
Right.
I think that's common with subjective understanding if you believe in a specific aspect of it.
Right.
For example, okay, you can act whatever you believe and that can
Right, it's saying that
contradict
every
other
group
beliefs.
was happy with the understanding that they had. Doesn't imply that every group was correct in the understanding that they had, right? Even the Quran talks about it over and over again. It says, زَيِّنَ لَهُمْ أَعْمَالَهُم. God adorned their actions for them, or adorned their understanding for them. It doesn't mean that God is accepting of their understanding, or God is confirming that whatever they believe in is correct as well. Practically, yes, we have no recourse but to our subjective understanding. My understanding of reality is my own subjective understanding. And that will happen for individuals, that will happen for societies as well. But all I am saying is that there also is an objective objective truth as well, all right? And that as human beings, and as a human being, I'm trying to move from my subjective understanding to make it closer and closer to that which is the objective truth, all right? That is what I call growth, this is what I call progressing and moving towards that objective truth, even if I don't exactly know what that objective truth is. The problem I find with existentialism, especially atheistic existentialism, is saying, there's no objective truth. Your subjective truth is, I guess, your objective truth. It is what is the most valuable thing. It is more valuable than the objective truth. That I have a problem with. So practically we all have our subjective understanding. We have nothing but our subjective understanding. All I'm saying is that we need to add to that there is an objective reality that I am striving to understand, and I'm always going to be moving towards understanding that. I'm always going to be growing towards understanding that, but I'm never going to reach it. We accept that. Right. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد